Hey everybody, and welcome back to Video Game Episode. Today I got a fun and very random episode for you guys this Friday because it's been some months since we talked about the 3DO M2, but I've got something new to show you and new to share with you as far as preservation is concerned. Thanks to Bulbasaur 3DO, must be a Pokemon and Star Wars fan, never actually asked him why that is his username. He actually acquired some of the controls for the GM kiosk for the 3DO M2 in North America. So this video is going to be talking about that miscellaneous hardware as well as the history of the 3DO M2 in the United States and why we have all these units in the first place. If you take a look right here, this is a gigantic trackball with an enter button and a PS2 style mouse controller, and I will get into why this is in just a moment. But the 3DO M2 had a very interesting history in North America as far as an interactive kiosk is concerned, and the only reason that we have units whatsoever that exist is because a company called DCI Marketing imported them from Japan, from Panasonic, to make interactive kiosks at GM car dealerships to show off the models that were available on the floor. As you take a look at this trackball right here, it is such a beefy assembly. You would expect someone just to put a keyboard and mouse on the desk, but they went way over the top, and that is because this trackball shares a lot in common with a trackball from a Golden Tee cabinet. Now this is emulation. I am using an analog controller. That is why I'm not hitting the ball very far whatsoever. I am much better at golf in real life than I am on a Golden Tee emulated cabinet with an Xbox controller in my hand. But the reason I bring this up is because this controller was made by Hap, and they make Golden Tee controllers as well. This unit has arcade parts in it, working on a 3DO M2 set of hardware that was also used for arcades. It's so funny how close to a gaming console this is because it has gaming controls. And you will see here if we pivot the board, it can use the PS2 connector, but it also has unpopulated headers for a USB control as well. With that chip on there, if I solder the headers in, you could use this on Windows and play Golden Tee if you so wanted. But taking a look at this interactive brand center content disc folder right here is for 2001 to 2005, and don't forget 3DO M2 was supposed to release in 1997. That's how long of a life this hardware actually had, just not in a gaming context. And if we take a look at the photograph of the kiosk, you're going to see that enter button and the trackball right here. The only thing we've never found from this kiosk is obviously the big metal frame and the monitor, which was probably a one-off, but this is hardware for the 3DO M2 or the Panasonic M2 interactive multimedia kiosk. That is where this comes from. So anytime you see an FZ-35 for sale in North America with North American branding on it, it is because it was at a GM dealership and somebody saved it. And that is how we have access to hardware like this you see on camera here, converting Tobey Polystars to go from an arcade game to a home console game. Most of these units, if not all of them in North America, were for GM dealerships. I've never found another example of this hardware being used in the US for anything other than this. And that is why it's so much fun to take a look at these controls and dump these discs for preservation, because it is a piece of gaming history, even if it is just in a GM aspect. You will see in this folder we have Disc 1, Disc 2, Disc 3, and Disc 4, and if you look below there will be a link to all of this content here. You can download it and check it out. Unfortunately, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are missing from this package and we do not have them. So if you know of another disc out there, hit me up, I'll buy it from you and I will dump it for free just for fun. But you'll see here with that PS2 style connector, the M2 spec was way more expanded than if it was just a home console. It had more power to it. It can take keyboard and mice, it can do touchscreens, it has DVD capabilities as well as a hard drive in the unit. But you see here, all of these Panasonic units marked with 120 volts for North America are for GM, way different than the FZ-21 console variant, which technically never released in the US for any sort of interactive multimedia appliance, and outside of one example, they're all going to be branded in Japanese with a 100 volt input on the bottom. If you see one of these with North American voltages on the bottom, definitely buy it because it is quite a rarity as far as rarities are concerned. But all of this, the 3DO M2 hardware, all of this time and engineering went into doing this. Showing ridiculous in 2003 era GMC commercials, and this is a blast from the past. If you were alive back then, this is what cars looked like. I don't remember this commercial from television, but this is what the 3DO M2 hardware ended up doing. You could watch commercials in a dealership, you could click around and look at some of the specifications of the cars. They were basically all set up as just point and click interactive menus that you could access, and that's because M2 also had an operating system and SDK that would allow for no code drag and drop development of it. You get something like this, and this is what it should have been doing. It is so weird that an arcade board in Japan that had 5 games released for it, 2 of which came over to North America, end up just becoming an interactive kiosk for GM. It might be the weirdest pivot of hardware I've ever seen. Panasonic spends $100 million to buy the exclusive rights to the 3DO M2 hardware, and all they can possibly do is produce Pontiac commercials on it. It is such an odd format. They spent a ton of money and then they just use the hardware to do stuff like this. Now don't get me wrong, it is fun to look at this, and from preservation standpoints, I do love being able to share this, but unfortunately it's not another game. But hopefully soon we'll have something gaming related to share with everybody that does own the hardware. I know a few more people have purchased units since I did my last video on the conversion process for Toei Polystars, so at least a few more people out there will be able to enjoy it until we figure out how to make everyone enjoy it. But taking a closer look at this hardware is so interesting. This is all done versus an optical rotary encoder. All those little windows there, their sensor will pick them up and how quickly they move past that sensor, which does not only denote the direction of the scroll, but also the speed in which it happens. That's why it's used for Golden Tee. It can measure that speed much more effectively. And this gigantic beefy enter button, which basically just served as a left mouse click, is just another hat product. DCI Marketing, the company that sold this hardware, just put arcade parts on a home console that never got released to make all of these GM commercials, and it is just hilarious. This is so overbuilt, but I love that it exists, because trust me, I do not care about the Pontiac Aztek. They've probably never made an uglier car in the history of vehicles, but the fact that DCI Marketing brought this hardware over to North America to put into GM dealerships in the first place means that we actually have access to way more 3DO M2 hardware than we normally would have. Because here's the thing, DCI Marketing put these kiosks in all GM dealerships in North America, and we do have reports of them being in Canada as well. That's why I say North America. Never seen anything from Mexico. But that means that there was a lot of them made. There's probably only a couple hundred Total Vice cabinets made, and as far as original boards, I know about 15 or 20 that are still out there. So the reason why you can just go and find an FZ-35 every once in a while if you're lucky is because recyclers didn't throw them in the trash. They actually kept them, and one person I know got one of his 3DO M2s because he was hired to deinstall these kiosks from GM dealerships. If you take a look at the file structure of the disc itself, it's just data files. These would install onto an internal hard drive on the FZ-35, and there is a reformat disc as well that I don't have access to, but that would basically reformat the drive and prepare it. And this is what we're targeting initially with the conversions done by Fixel for the FZ-35 itself. We want all of the arcade games to run on that, because the FZ-35 GM kiosk hardware has the same amount of RAM as the expanded spec that the arcade boards did, meaning we can do direct conversions with a lot of work. But it's just so funny that these commercials are what the 3DO M2 ended up as. I just don't understand these commercials either. What does a submarine and a sports stadium and a baby in a stroller have to do with a truck that has a rear sunroof? I'm not surprised that did not continue in automotive manufacturing, because it looks absolutely ridiculous. And if you were wondering, DCI Marketing, they're based in Milwaukee, they still exist. All the way back from the 3DO M2 days to the recording of this video, this is a company, and one of their biggest markets is the automotive industry still. If you look, GM is still a client of theirs, and what are they doing for them? They're putting interactive multimedia kiosks in car dealerships so you can click around and look at your potential car. They've been doing this since 2000, 23 years later, they're still at it. And that's the reason why if you do find a FZ-35 in North America to purchase, you can pretty much be guaranteed it lived its life at a GM dealership and people were clicking around looking at cars. So much so that I remember being at a Saab dealership in like 2004 and using a kiosk to check things out while I waited, and I played a 3DO M2 long before I got interested in them. And if you've been paying attention to the channel, you know I'm quite interested in the M2. More software preserved, more oddities explained, and we will see you guys next time. Bye bye.